Hi, this is Jim Sharpe. Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. Headline number one, Governor Katie Hobbs endorses Ruben Gallego for the Senate race. Well, that's because, she's a Democrat, he's a Democrat, and her friend, Kyrsten Sinema, is out of the race. Headline number two, Joe Biden, fresh off clinching the Democratic nomination, is actually going to be visiting Arizona on Tuesday and Wednesday. And speaking of Tuesday, he's going to be here the day that we hold our presidential preference election. This is Arizona's version of a presidential primary. And joining me to talk about this is Tony Cani, who is a Democratic political strategist, and he's the founder of Slingshot Campaigns.
That's it.
Yeah, and he was Tony was the deputy state director for the Biden campaign in 2020. Hey, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Things got even crazier than 2020, didn't they?
Yeah, it's every, you always say like, oh, it's the most important election in your lifetime, right? That's a thing that people have said for a long time.
Yeah,
and then
they've said it my whole life.
And then it's like, I think it's true over and over. I think it's actually true over and over again. But this has been, the last 4 years have been just the most bizarre years in politics. It's been scary in a lot of ways. It's been fun in some other ways, but it's been nuts. Yeah. Especially in Arizona.
So what should people watch out for in the PPE, this presidential preference election, which, by the way, because of COVID, I thought that was personal protective equipment.
Yeah,
but
right.
PPE, because, Biden's going to win and Trump's going to win.
Yeah, they've both already clinched. And so, I don't think that there's a ton of drama or real questioning here. So I don't know if there's much to watch for because, even if somebody out, randomly, everybody wrote in Carrie Lake and she won the PPE or something like that on the Republican side, it wouldn't matter. This election, though, is an interesting one in the sense that, the PPE some years ago was what sort of brought to the surface election problems, right? That's how, Fontes got elected to the recorder's office because there were just some problems with not enough polling places and these kinds of things. And I think that some people will be looking at this election to see whether or not it runs smoothly, even though it's not contested. And so you could look at that. The other thing to look at just from a political hack perspective is just how many people vote. And then the kind of thing that people like I will look at is whether or not they voted in this kind of an election before to see if there's an indication of new people who are being brought into the system by some, robust voter outreach programs that are being run on the right and on the left as we, gear up to be one of the four most important states in the 2024 election. Yeah, no, we're definitely a swing state. And there was that strange poll that showed, I think, wasn't the Times Siena poll. It was, I don't remember exactly which poll it was, but it showed that Gen Z is in deep on Trump. They love Trump, but those people don't show up to vote. Well, so I've seen other polls that show different things. Yeah. And here's so I think that I don't know if I totally buy those numbers, but I do think that Democrats should be paying attention to them because here, let me give you a little factoid about young voters. We think a lot about voter turnout percentage as a way to determine the power that a voting bloc has. Right. And so if you look at the 2022 election, seniors voted like 80%, something like that, some very high number. And then voters under 30, it was much lower. It was like 40%. But Mark Kelly won voters under 30 by, I think Blake Masters only got 20% of the vote total. Right. Yeah. And the number of votes that Mark Kelly netted was way more than the number of votes that Blake Masters netted when he won seniors. And so if you think about it like that, where it comes if you win one of these smaller groups by a huge number, right, it does. Even though they don't have a ton of political power, when you think about the raw number of votes, it's a huge advantage. And so, I do think that Biden and Democrats should be paying attention to some of the frustration that Generation Z and that millennials are having with with the economy and with, some of the things that they were hoping were going to get accomplished. A lot of the economic struggles that people are feeling, younger people are feeling them more than other people. Right, yeah. And so that is, so I've seen counter polling that shows that, it's in a better position, but it's a thing that Democrats should be paying attention to, for sure. One of the things that, this is actually on Super Tuesday morning, Chuck Coughlin, legendary political consultant here in Arizona, right? Chuck said one of the things to look out for
even though, I think Haley won one state that day. He said the thing to look out for is by how big of a percentage Trump won his primaries, because he needs every Republican just about to vote for him, because there's hardly any crossover Democrats and not a lot of independents that are going to vote for Trump. He's definitely the Republican candidate. Is that something to look for on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to judge because you don't know. Yes, but the problem is if it's a low turnout primary, it might not mean as much because people might just be choosing to not mail their ballots in because they know that it was already wrapped up. But you've seen these statewide elections in Arizona; they're very, very close.
Yeah,
We won by 10,000 votes in 2020 on the Biden side. And I think that 10 to 30,000 votes is sort of the window in which you're going to win. And when you win by such a small number of votes, everybody won you the election. Do you know what I mean? Like it's every demographic that you got. Like we did extraordinarily well in the Navajo Nation. Yeah, that probably did it, right? Like we did really well with Republicans who were frustrated. We got a couple percent of Republicans who were frustrated with Trump. That probably won us the election, right? You kind of need everything in order to win, especially if you're a Democrat in the state. And so I do think that the idea of dissatisfied Republicans is certainly a thing to look at when you're forecasting the state.
What is Biden going to do different, or what is he already doing different in Arizona as opposed to what the campaign did in 2020?
There's going to be two huge differences, and the first thing is that he's going to be here much more often.
Yeah, as we just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean he's already been here during his term a decent amount. We got one really big visit from him, and that was it. And it was a sort of notable one because it was the only campaign swing that he did with his vice president candidate. And it was the first time they had even been in a room together since he picked her because of COVID stuff. And we got Kamala Harris one other time. And so there's going to be a lot more of these like stop-by visits. That's one thing that's going to happen a lot. The other thing is that the Democrats run a really good field program. Like we're very good at knocking on doors, persuading voters, reminding people to put in their ballots. That's a strength.
And that's primarily because of younger people, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, yes, but it's also a cultural thing among Democratic activists in our state where it's sort of like the way you make a difference is you go and knock on your neighbor's doors.
Sure.
And I know there's some movement among some of the Republican organizations to start to pick that up a little bit more. But that's going to be a big difference. It's just the fact that we are going to be able to roll out this army of people who are going to be out there talking to voters in a way that we didn't have before, which I think will have a bigger impact probably on the down ballot races. But those are the two major sort of like running a campaign differences that you're going to see. And then, the other thing is that, he's going to be touting, the infrastructure benefits that he brought to the state. There's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff going around.
That was one of the big visits he made during his term was the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Plant, the kind of the ribbon cutting ceremony, if you will.
Yeah. The CHIPS Act, which Mark Kelly was sort of the big guy behind, is people are crediting that with a lot of the economic growth. This is like such a random thing to say, but one of the things we learned in the polling in 2020 was that Arizonans sometimes aren't super responsive to economic job creation messages that come from like national candidates. And part of the reason is because the speculation was that Arizonans don't necessarily think, they're talking about like Midwestern type job creation, manufacturing, this kind of stuff. Like that's not going to impact us, right? So we talked a lot about like entrepreneurialism and that stuff. But now we have one of the fastest growing manufacturing sectors in the entire country. And so you're going to start seeing much more of that. And we're going to see whether or not, younger people are starting to look at those as job opportunities for them in the state, and whether or not that, when they start seeing that more in the campaign trail, whether or not that's pulling people into the polls.
When I worked in politics, I worked primarily with Republicans, even though I'm still a registered independent, have been for a long, long time. Is it? And I always kind of imagine it would be hard. It'd be a tough road. You wouldn't make as much being a Democratic political strategist or consultant or any of that stuff. Is it still an uphill battle, though, for Democrats in Arizona? I mean, the largest voting, the largest percentage of voters is independents, and that's followed by Republicans, and still Democrats are still in third place.
Yeah, it's tough. I think there's two things that come from that. One is, I think that people who've been doing this in the state, like I have for a long time on the Democratic side, we've had to scrap and fight and pull our stuff up. And so we have a lot of kind of battle-tested consultants. And one thing I think that we're seeing as these campaigns start to play out is that the Republicans aren't used to running in competitive campaigns. And so I think some of the mistakes that you've seen from some of their statewide candidates come from this idea that really the only muscle they've developed is how to win a Republican primary.
Right.
And so you start to see that.
Just point and say liberal.
Yeah, and you start to see that, right? Like, don't California my Arizona.
Right.
That kind of stuff. The reason why Democrats have been as competitive as fast is because of the complete takeover of the Republican Party by the Turning Point USA types, by the sort of extreme Trump types. And that has been what has made this as competitive as it is now. And I think that if there were more sort of standard Republican candidates, we would have a harder time. And so, and I think that that's playing out with Republican voters and independent voters. And it's playing out with Democratic voters who I think understand, at least they did in the last couple elections, the stakes. And so they've been much more engaged, knowing that they have a chance to win, but also it's like we have to stop some of these, outrageous, in my opinion, things that are being pushed by the people who control the Republican Party.
Well, and I think, and some Republicans would argue that, there's the extremes on the Democratic side as well that, tend to keep Democratic candidates out of mainstream thinking sometimes. And, I think you'll hear that complaint from within your own party and from the other party as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's why you see Democratic candidates focus, the statewide candidates have focused. They haven't, they lean into stuff when it comes to sort of abortion rights. They're not afraid to do that. They're not afraid to talk about providing more benefits to seniors through prescription drug benefit and that kind of stuff. They aren't afraid of pushing some of these things that have typically been considered liberal, but they also are very aware of the fact that you have to appeal to a broad group of Arizonans in order to win an election. And I think that's how it plays out. And one of the benefits that Democratic candidates have is that our primaries have not been a race, a sprint to the left. They haven't been this big competitive battle to see who can, prove that they're the most like Bernie Sanders or something like that. That's not happening. But if you look at the competitive Republican primaries, it's all about Trump. That's it. I know that this isn't a competitive district, but if you look at the primary between Toma and Blake Masters and Hamada in the Lesko's old congressional district, Abe's entire campaign is I'm Donald Trump's friend. There's not really policies, there's not really anything. And that's how the Republican primary was for governor. And it just puts people in it's very hard to unring that bell when you've spent your entire campaign and in the last 3 months you're trying to
pretend that with Carrie
moderate.
Lake right now.
Right.
And she's trying to reach out to the middle and with very mixed results.
Yeah. Well, she's addicted to the attention of the far right social media people, which makes it easier for people like me. But
you mentioned, I think you mentioned the term generic Republicans. And what's so funny is when we had Mike Noble here last week, the pollster, he said that, still the preferred brand for the majority of Arizona voters is generic Republican.
Yeah.
But the problem is they don't exist almost. There's almost no such thing as a generic Republican anymore.
Yeah. I mean, you have people who are in office that are effective at governing that are in the Republican Party. You have Stephen Richer, who's done a good job running that county recorder's office. They're trying to chase him out. You have the mayor of Mesa, Mayor Giles, who is one of the best mayors that this state has ever had. He's extraordinarily effective. And, there's no way he could win a Republican primary. Yeah. And that's the kind of person who, if he was running statewide, it'd be very, very, very hard to beat him.
And this goes back to Senator Flake.
Yeah.
And even the challenges to Senator McCain back in the day, too.
Yeah.
This has been around for a while. It's but Trump really brought it to a point.
And I think that, operationally, the people who are who are holding the checkbook for the Republican Party now, the people who sort of are really in control, they are the ones that before were kind of the extreme folks that, Ducey would whisper a veto threat because he was afraid that we'd lose the Super Bowl or something when they were pushing some stuff. And he kind of would be able to calm them down. But over time, as they got more powerful and people like Wendy Rogers was being financed by the business side of the Republican Party, I think much to their regret now, that these people have taken over the party in our state in a way that is, I don't think, here's a Democrat saying this, I do not think that they are in touch with regular Republican voters. I think that is a big chunk of the Republican electorate that looks at some of this stuff and is like, I just don't think that's for me. And then they're going to look at some of the Democrats and say, I don't think that's for me either. And so it creates this weird swing vote that doesn't exist typically in our state, which is like, how do you get these Republicans that are unsatisfied to vote for you?
So one last question, and I hate to put you on the spot because this will live forever.
Yeah.
Right. Way past the PPE. Do you care to make a prediction on the presidential preference election? Will it be Biden and will it be Trump? Just throw it out there. Tony, go throw caution.
Yeah,
my friend.
I have a feeling that they're both going to win. I think it's going to be them.
That was the easy take, by the way. Just so you know, that was the easy take.
I think they're going to pull it off. It's gonna be a big win for Biden and for Trump.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate it, man. That was good stuff. Good stuff. This PPE, the presidential preference election, will be more than just Trump on the GOP ballot and more than just Biden on the Democratic ballot. Besides Biden, there will be 6 other Democratic candidates, and other than Trump, there will be 8 Republicans appearing on the ballot. If you vote for one of them, are you throwing away your vote? After all, we just discussed how Biden and Trump will walk away winners in the presidential preference primary. And Biden has already won enough delegates across the country to secure his party's nomination. In fact, Trump has too. Unlike me, my wife is a registered member of a political party, and she felt a little like she threw her mail-in vote away because the person she voted for in the presidential preference election dropped out of the race the day after she mailed in her ballot. But are the Mavericks who vote for someone other than the presumptive winners throwing away their vote? Or are they making a sacrifice to send a message, using their vote as an opportunity to show that they're tired of Trump's asinine antics and Biden's great-grandfatherly gaffes? So if you'd like to see a little fresh blood, vote for Frankie Lozado or Marianne Williamson instead of Joseph R. Biden Jr. and send a message to the Democratic Party that you'd like someone to finish their second term before requiring depends. Or if you're a Republican, vote for John Anthony Castro or Nikki Haley instead of Donald J. Trump to send a message that you'd like someone leading the nation who doesn't spend time in a tanning bed dreaming up new conspiracy theories. Or if you're happy with one of the 2 choices that we will ultimately be presented with again, then don't, and vote for Trident or Bump or Biden or Trump. But then don't complain in November that you're voting for the lesser of 2 evils, because that's still voting for an evil. All right, that's going to do it for our AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. Thanks to Tony Cani for joining us this week, and we will see you next time.